I used to measure my nights in cardboard and steam, the hot breath of mozzarella fogging my windshield, the red digits of the dashboard clock ticking me closer to midnight, the smell of tomato and oregano stitched into the fibers of my hoodie. I told myself this was temporary. College bills, rent, a stubborn car that needed more prayer than gasoline. But it was amazing how quickly temporary learned to unpack its suitcase and live with you. By the time the Friday crowd started to thin and the shop radio switched from dance tracks to scratchy old love songs, I was already on my last run. Hands slick with dish soap and fryer air, eyes a little gritty, tip jar a little light. The address popped on the screen, and I almost thought it was a joke. A tower uptown, glass like a blade. The kind of place with a doorman who could probably bench press two of me and still fix your tie with one hand. It wasn't my usual route. My beat was walk-ups with broken buzzers and dogs who barked at the smell of pepperoni. Still, the order was paid by card, and they wanted change for a possible tip. Possible. The word made me smile and sigh at the same time. Driving there, the city looked rinsed and quiet, like it had been wrung out and left to dry. Streetlights were little cones of gold on wet pavement. Every red light gave me another beat to breathe and talk myself into not expecting anything special. You drop the pizza, leave the napkins, maybe make someone sleep a little better with carbs. That's it. That's the job. The tower's lobby was a greenhouse of marble and hush. I felt like the humidity of the kitchen came in with me, clinging to my forearms under the company-branded jacket. The doorman gave a polite, not-quite smile, a quick glance to the insulated bag, then a nod toward the elevators. 32, he said, pressing the button for me. I caught my reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall, messy hair flattened by a cap I'd stuffed in my pocket, a smudge of flour near my wrist like a fingerprint from a long shift. My name tag hung crooked. I straightened it out. Company policy. Appearances matter. The elevator purred up without stopping, smooth as if it had swallowed all the noise from the city below. I watched floors climb like numbers on a test I wasn't sure I'd studied for. 17, 22, 29. Somewhere behind me the pizza settled in the bag with a soft sigh, cheese tugging back into place. I told myself to remember the script. Smile, confirm order, present change, thank them, leave. 5 steps, tops. No lingering, no awkwardness. The last thing I needed was a complaint because I stood too long like a lost puppy, or worse, because I didn't notice the customer was in a mood. The hallway was a hotel whisper. Thick carpet, framed abstract art. That faint expensive smell that's hard to describe. Like new books and cold air. The door had a brass number that caught the light. I balanced the bag on my knee and knocked. 3 polite taps. I could already feel my shoulders preparing for whatever waited. The hurried thanks, the distracted phone call. The guy who opens the door and shouts at someone across the room about napkins. It's funny how you can prepare for 1,000 normal things and still be unprepared for the one that actually happens. The door opened. He was there. Bare shoulders, damp hair, a towel knotted at the waist. For a second I wondered if I had the wrong script entirely, if I'd walked onto a set I didn't belong on. The hallway air stole into my lungs and stuck there. He was older than me, not by decades but by enough to wear it well, with that calm confidence people get from assuming rooms will always widen for them. Water beaded at his collarbone and tracked downward. I blinked hard at the pizza box to remind myself why I existed in this moment. Company policy. Appearances matter. Good night, he said, and smiled. The word good stretching a little, turning warmer. You made it fast. Traffic's kind at this hour, I said, and immediately hated how too bright my voice sounded. I held out the bag like a shield. Large margarita, extra basil. You wanted change for a tip, right? He said, glancing over my shoulder at the silent hallway, then back at me. Come in while I find where I put my wallet. He stepped aside. The towel stayed. The knot looked casual, like a last-minute idea that worked too well. I hesitated on the threshold. Company policy said curbside. Company instincts said don't. But something about the way he spoke, neither rushed nor coy, more like a neighbor asking you to hold the door, unclenched my caution by a fraction. I crossed into his apartment, the door whispering shut behind me. The place was the opposite of the kitchen I just left. Cool, neat, curated. A soft rug greeted my shoes like it had been waiting for them. There was a skyline beyond the glass, a scatter of stars that belonged to offices instead of the sky. He gestured to the kitchen island, and I set the bag down. My eyes flicked around automatically, making mental notes the way you do when you're in someone else's space. A bowl with keys and a single cufflink, a stack of magazines that looked untouched, a plant that was either very healthy or very fake. "Can I get you water?" he asked, already moving toward a cabinet. The towel moved with him, effortless, a casual risk. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you." My hands found the familiar motions, box out, receipt, coins in the small envelope we use so people don't have to touch your palm if they don't want to. I tried to stand like a professional, like a person made of policies. But awareness crawled over me. Of the quiet, of how close we were in that quiet, of the way the air in here smelled faintly like cedar and clean skin. I stared at the receipt as if it contained a math problem only honesty could solve. He opened a drawer, closed it, then another. A soft clatter of nothing helpful. "I swear I had it here," he said, chuckling lightly. I came out of the shower and thought, don't forget the delivery guy will be here any second. And then he opened another drawer and looked inside like it might magically develop a wallet if he loved it enough. "Are you in a rush?" "The shop's closing after this run," I said, keeping it neutral. My voice moved like I wasn't inside of it, polite, practical. My pulse didn't get the memo. "Good," he said, glancing back at me. The smile again. Not a grin, just that slow curve that made something in my stomach tilt. "I mean, not good for business. Good that I won't ruin your schedule if it takes me a minute." He checked the living room next, as if a wallet might decide the couch was a better friend than a drawer. He was pretending. I could tell. There was a looseness to the search, a theatricality, like he was trying on the role of the forgetful host and seeing if it fit. It would have been annoying with anyone else. With him, it felt like an invitation written in pencil. Easy to erase if I stepped back. "People always apologize to the delivery guy," he said, not looking at me as he lifted a cushion with 2 fingers. "As if we don't both know the apartment is the real show. We both pretend I didn't just open the door half-dressed. You pretend you don't notice anything. I pretend I'm very bad at finding a wallet." I exhaled something that wanted to be a laugh but got caught around my ribs. "I notice pizzas mostly," I said, aiming for light. "I'm professionally trained not to notice anything else." "You're doing very well," he said, replacing the cushion, finally meeting my eyes. The look wasn't predatory. It wasn't even overtly flirtatious. It was attentive, the kind of attention that says, "I see you noticing, and I'm noticing that you're trying not to." It scared me a little because it was kind. Kind made it harder to back away. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an automated reminder about closing tasks. I didn't check it. I stood with my weight on one leg, then the other, and tried very hard to be a person whose hands didn't want something they shouldn't want. A different version of me would have cracked a joke, cut the tension, moved the whole thing back onto rails. But I kept thinking of the last tip I'd counted at the end of the night, the coins sticking to my palm with pizza grease. I kept thinking how long it had been since someone looked at me and made me feel like the room had shifted to accommodate my presence, not the other way around. "You live nearby?" he asked. "Not really," I said. 20 minutes. 30 if my car forgets how to be a car." He smiled again, softer this time. "I remember 20. I remember the way 30 felt like a story you were telling about yourself." "How long are you going to keep doing this?" "Delivering?" I asked. "Working too late for a place that won't remember your last name when you leave." He said it without judgment, like someone stating the weather. "Until I can afford not to," I said. "Like everyone." He nodded once as if I'd confirmed a theory. "I found it," he said, suddenly lifting a wallet from exactly nowhere. Maybe he'd tucked it on the counter behind something. He flipped it open, then paused, his eyebrows tilting. "This is embarrassing," he said. A warm laugh threaded through the words. "I don't have cash. And the tip field on the app. Did it lock already?" It did, I said. I couldn't keep the professional script from resurfacing. It's fine. Honestly. It's not, he said. I meant to show appreciation. He let the word linger between us. Layered. Do you ever accept other forms of thanks? There it was, the shift from play acting to articulation. He'd said it gently, like an experiment, like he expected me to shake my head, to excuse myself, to return to the elevator and the lobby and the car that sometimes wasn't a car. My conscience raised its hand, eager to volunteer the right answer. No. Policy. Boundaries. This uniform is a promise. I'm working, I said, a little too quickly, as if that sentence could be a wall. I know, he said, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable. You can say no, and I'll, what's the phrase? Have a good night. And this will be a story we both forget. But if you say yes, it doesn't have to be messy. Can be simple. Human. I swallowed. The room got smaller, or I did. I remembered my boss's voice from training. We are our reputation. You are your decisions. I remembered my rent due date, taped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tomato. I remembered, too, the way my chest had gone quiet when he opened the door. The hush that wasn't fear. I'm not that guy, I said, more to myself than to him. What guy? He asked, as if the label mattered less than how I used it to keep myself in place. The kind who, you know. I scrubbed a hand over the back of my neck. Turns a delivery into. I stopped because naming it felt like stepping over a line I wasn't ready to cross. He took one slow breath, then another, as if pacing himself to my heartbeat. Then let's not name it, he said. Let's just. In the silence that followed, the apartment gathered itself around us. I could hear the far-off hum of the city through the glass, the whisper of the air conditioning, the faint drip of a shower settling in the bathroom I hadn't seen. I could hear my own pulse stumbling. And then he did something so simple and so deliberate that it unhooked the rest of my night. He let go of the towel. It slipped, a soft sound like a secret agreeing to be told, and fell to the rug between us. I didn't look down. I didn't have to. My eyes stayed locked on his, on the steadiness there, on the question that wasn't a question anymore. For a long beat I stood absolutely still, the company logo on my chest feeling both too small and too loud, as ethics and desire collided and waited for me to pick a side. For a few heartbeats I didn't move. The room had gone utterly still except for the faint hum of the city pressing against the windows. Then instinct or fear of my own thoughts made me step back. My heel brushed the edge of the rug. I should go, I said, the word small, uncertain. He didn't argue, didn't reach for the towel. He only watched me with that quiet confidence that somehow wasn't arrogance, more like a man long past the point of pretending he didn't know what he wanted. I caught the faintest curl of a smile before I turned away. The door handle felt cold, my pulse loud in my ears. Hey, he said softly, you don't have to be afraid. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I hesitated. The apology disarmed me faster than anything else could. When I looked back, he had already wrapped the towel around his waist again, tying it neatly, almost formally, as if to give the scene its dignity back. I'm not afraid, I said. It wasn't true. I was afraid of how curious I was. He nodded toward the counter. At least take a drink of water. You look like you've been running all night. I stayed where I was, hand on the doorknob. Every part of me knew how this was supposed to go. You leave, you laugh about the story later, you don't think about the way his voice sounded when he said goodnight. Yet I found myself letting go of the handle and turning back. He poured 2 glasses, condensation trailing down the glass like a thin silver line. You deliver all over the city? He asked, casual but deliberate, as if conversation might sew the moment back together. Mostly midtown. Sometimes uptown if the others are busy. And do you always get invited in? I met his eyes. No, this is new. He smiled a little at that. For me too. He set my glass on the counter, then leaned against it. I didn't really want pizza tonight. That caught me off guard. Then why order it? He took a slow sip of water before answering. Because food is easier to ask for than company. The line could have sounded rehearsed, but it didn't. It landed somewhere deep and quiet, in that place where loneliness echoes long after you've learned to ignore it. He must have seen something shift in my face, because his tone softened. Don't worry, I'm not trying to trap you. I just wanted someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't already know how my day went, or what I should have done differently. I let out a careful breath. You could have just said that. He shrugged lightly. And would you have come in if I had? I wanted to say yes, but both of us knew the answer. So I drank the water instead. It was cold, grounding. He began asking small questions, where I was from, what I studied, whether I liked driving around at night. Nothing invasive, just enough to keep my mind flicking between answers and the way he listened. His attention was steady, almost old-fashioned. In a world of half-listening, he made me feel like every word I said mattered. Little by little the distance between us shrank, not with movement but with familiarity. The tension in my shoulders eased. I started to notice details, the faint scar near his temple, the way his voice dipped when he said something personal, the quiet fatigue behind his poise. I've been alone here for a while, he admitted eventually. This place looks big on purpose. It hides the silence. There it was again, the loneliness behind the confidence. Something about it pulled at me harder than the flirtation ever could. I get that, I said quietly. Sometimes I drive the long way home, just so I don't have to walk into an empty apartment. He smiled without looking at me. Then maybe we're both doing the same thing tonight, trying not to feel empty. The honesty in that sentence filled the room more than any touch could. I didn't realize until then that I'd set my glass down beside his, our fingers almost brushing. When he reached for his knuckle grazed my wrist. It was nothing, barely contact, but my breath caught anyway. He didn't move his hand right away. He didn't need to. The silence stretched just long enough for me to feel every contradiction waking up inside me. Professionalism, curiosity, attraction, guilt. I should go, I said again, but softer, like even I didn't believe it this time. You can, he said, still gentle. But if you stay, it doesn't have to mean anything you don't want it to. The words were simple, yet they carried something heavier than invitation. They carried understanding. I searched for sarcasm or performance in his tone and found none. Only warmth, quiet and deliberate. He stepped aside, giving me space to choose. For a few seconds I stood there, motionless, caught between the door and the gravity pulling me back toward him. My brain ran all the scenarios. Boss finding out, friends teasing, my own reflection tomorrow morning. But my heart beat to a different rhythm. Slower, deeper, dangerously curious. Why me? I asked. You don't even know me. He met my gaze steady as before. Maybe that's the point. You don't come with a history, just this moment. Something in that answer made my chest tighten. I took a step forward without realizing it. The distance between us folded until we were sharing the same breath. The light from the city painted faint reflections across the counter, turning his eyes into two pieces of midnight glass. He reached out, slow enough for me to stop him, and brushed his fingertips against my wrist. A gesture so light it felt like asking permission in another language. The contact was brief, but it sent a current straight up my arm. I didn't pull away. I don't know what I'm doing, I whispered. You don't have to, he said. Sometimes not knowing is the only honest thing left. We stood there like that, close, but not touching anymore. The kind of silence that hums louder than any noise. I could smell the faint trace of soap on his skin, feel the warmth radiating from him. Everything about the moment teetered on a knife edge between right and wrong, need and reason. Finally, I stepped back. The motion felt like breaking surface after holding my breath too long. I should go, I repeated, firmer this time. He didn't stop me. He only nodded once, accepting it with the same calm he'd had since I knocked on his door. Fair, he said quietly. I picked up the empty pizza bag, more for something to do with my hands than because I needed to. The room seemed to tilt a little as I moved toward the door, my heartbeat outpacing my thoughts. When I reached for the handle, his voice followed me. Low, even, and impossible to ignore. You'll come back, he said, not as a question, not even as hope, just a fact spoken softly enough to haunt me. Then, almost under his breath, "Won't you?" I turned halfway, meeting his eyes one last time. I didn't answer. I just opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and let it close behind me. The elevator ride down felt twice as long as the one up. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked like someone who'd forgotten the script entirely. Someone whose chest still carried the echo of a question he didn't want to answer. Outside, the night air hit cold against my skin, sharp enough to remind me of everything real. Yet even as I walked to my car, I could still feel that light touch on my wrist, and his voice lingered like a line from a song you wish you didn't know by heart. When I started the engine, the pizza bag lay empty on the seat beside me, the smell of oregano faint and fading. I told myself it was just another delivery, just another customer. But the truth slid through the cracks of denial, quiet and persistent. I wasn't sure if I'd go back, but I already knew I would. The next few days blurred together like streaks of rain on the windshield. Shift after shift, box after box. My mind running on muscle memory while my thoughts stayed somewhere else entirely. Every time I reached for a pizza box or zipped a delivery bag, I'd see flashes. The skyline through his window, the calm in his eyes when everything inside me was chaos. The way his voice dipped at the end of a sentence like it carried something unspoken. I told myself I'd imagined most of it. People get lonely, people say things they don't mean. I convinced myself he probably forgot about me 5 minutes after I left. But whenever my phone lit up with a new order, a part of me braced for his address to appear again. And then one slow Tuesday evening it did. Same tower, same apartment number. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My coworker, Reggie, nudged my shoulder. "You taking that one, or should I?" "I've got it," I said too fast. He grinned. "High-tipping neighborhood, huh?" "Something like that." The drive there felt shorter this time, though my pulse didn't agree. The city looked softer tonight, smudged with drizzle, the kind of rain that glows under streetlights. When I parked near the tower, I sat for a while with the engine idling, watching the building rise against the gray sky. Part of me wanted to call and say the order got reassigned. The other part just wanted to see him again, to prove the first night hadn't been some fever dream of exhaustion and temptation. The doorman recognized me. "32 again?" he asked with a knowing half-smile. I nodded, muttering something about repeat customers. In the elevator, I rehearsed a dozen lines in my head. Casual greetings, polite jokes, apologies for last time. But they all melted away when the doors slid open. He was already standing at the doorway when I knocked, fully dressed this time. Dark sweater, jeans, hair still damp but neatly combed. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him without the towel and the quiet danger of that night. He smiled like I'd just arrived at the right time. "I was hoping you'd take this one," he said. "Lucky timing," I managed, handing over the bag. "Come in for a minute?" he asked. "No games, I promise. Just to talk." I hesitated, the old push and pull inside me stirring again. But the way he said it, low, almost tentative, felt different this time. So I stepped inside. The apartment was dimly lit, music humming low in the background. Not romantic music, just something soft and wordless that made the place feel less like a museum and more like someone actually lived there. He unpacked the pizza and set 2 plates on the counter. "I figured you'd be hungry too. You didn't eat last time." "I'm technically not supposed to," I said, half smiling. "But I guess technically we broke a few rules already." That earned a quiet laugh. True, we ate in silence for a bit. It was strange, comforting, even without the shock or flirtation from before. The moment felt real, grounded. After a while, he leaned back against the counter, eyes on the skyline. "You ever feel like the city's full of people trying not to admit they're lonely?" "All the time," I said. "You deliver enough food past midnight, you start to see patterns. Some people just want noise in the house." He nodded slowly. "That used to be me too. I filled my life with things. Meetings, plans, dinners, everything except honesty." His tone shifted, something heavier underneath. I didn't press, but he kept talking. "I'm married," he said finally. Well, we've been separated for a year. Paperwork's in progress, but it feels like waiting for permission to breathe again. The confession wasn't dramatic, just quietly painful. I looked at him, unsure what to say. I didn't cheat, he added quickly. Not physically, but I think my heart gave up before the marriage did. I started wanting someone to look at me and actually see me, not the version that makes sense at dinner parties. I swallowed, trying to ignore the way his words landed too close to home. I get that, I said. Sometimes I feel invisible too, like I'm just a name on a receipt. He glanced at me then, eyes softer than before. You're not invisible. For a moment neither of us looked away. The rain outside softened against the glass, steady and patient. The music blurred into the background, just rhythm and breath. I tried to change the subject. So what do you do when you're not ordering pizza to trick unsuspecting delivery guys? That earned a laugh that warmed the air. Architect, used to design places for other people to live while I avoided living in my own. Sounds poetic, I said. Sounds lonely, he corrected. There was something magnetic about the quiet that followed. Not empty, but charged, like the air right before a summer storm. He reached for his glass of wine and offered it to me. Here, just a sip. You look like you could use something stronger than soda. I took it, hesitating only for a second. Our fingers brushed. Again that small, electric current. I wasn't sure if it was the wine or his proximity that warmed my chest. You ever think about leaving all this? He asked, gesturing toward the window, the city, the noise. All the time, I said. But every time I try, life reminds me I can't afford to. He nodded, thoughtful. Sometimes the cost of staying is worse than the cost of leaving. I turned that over in my head, the weight of it settling somewhere deep. We talked for nearly an hour about nothing and everything. His childhood summers by the coast. My first car that wouldn't start unless I kicked the gas pedal twice. The strange comfort of routine, the fear of change, the things we both lost trying to be who others wanted us to be. Somewhere in that conversation, the tension changed shape. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was recognition. Two people accidentally standing in the same emotional shadow. At one point, he reached across the counter to pour more wine, and his hand lingered near mine. Our eyes met, and the silence that followed was louder than any thunder. I didn't move, neither did he. If he had leaned in, I wouldn't have stopped him. But he didn't. He just studied my face, like he was afraid that one more inch would shatter something fragile between us. You should probably go before it gets too late, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Yeah. I breathed, though I didn't want to move. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of cedar on his sweater, see the small line of worry at the corner of his mouth. You'll be back on shift tomorrow? Probably. He nodded, eyes still locked on mine. Then maybe I'll order again. The space between us tightened until it wasn't even a full breath. For a second, gravity tilted the world toward him, the ache of wanting something you're not supposed to touch. I saw the question in his eyes, felt it rise in mine. Then I stepped back. The moment broke like glass underfoot. Softly, almost invisibly, but final. He smiled sadly as if he'd expected that. Good night, Daniel. It was the first time he'd said my name. It hit harder than any touch could have. Good night, I said, voice unsteady. By the time I reached the elevator, I could still feel the warmth of the room clinging to me. I pressed the button and watched the numbers descend, heart thudding like footsteps in an empty hallway. When the doors closed, I saw my reflection, tired, restless, changed. Somewhere between ethics and desire, I'd found something more dangerous, connection. And as the elevator hummed downward, one thought refused to leave me. If he ordered again, I knew I wouldn't say no. 3 nights passed before I gave in. I told myself I was just going for a drive, to clear my head, to feel the night air, to listen to music that might drown out the thoughts circling like moths in my skull. But my hands on the steering wheel betrayed me. They knew the route before my conscience could catch up. The turn onto his street felt automatic, a motion learned by heart. No delivery bag this time. No uniform. Just me, a jacket, and a pulse that refused to slow down. When I parked, the tower gleamed like a lighthouse above the city. I stared up at it, half hoping I'd lose my nerve. I almost did. But then I thought of how his voice had softened when he said my name, how he'd looked at me as if he wanted to say more but didn't. That memory alone was enough to move my feet. The doorman glanced up when I entered, recognition flickering. "He's expecting you?" I hesitated. "Not exactly." He studied me for a beat, then nodded toward the elevators. "Go on." The ride up felt heavier than the first time. Like every floor I passed was another question I couldn't answer. What was I doing? Why couldn't I stay away? The mirrored walls reflected a man who looked more nervous than guilty, which somehow felt worse. When I reached his floor, I stood before the door for a long moment, unsure whether to knock. Before I could decide, it opened. He was there, not surprised, not smiling, just looking at me with quiet understanding. "I knew you'd come," he said simply. "I shouldn't have," I replied. "I know." He stepped aside. I entered. The same apartment, but something about it felt different now. Dim light from the lamps instead of the ceiling fixtures, curtains half drawn. The faint scent of cedar and rain drifting through the open balcony door. A record played softly in the background, something old and steady. He gestured to the sofa. "Sit." I did. He poured 2 glasses of wine but didn't hand me one immediately. Instead, he stood near the window, back turned, voice low. "I thought about calling you, but I didn't want to make you choose." I swallowed. "And yet, here I am." He looked over his shoulder, a small, almost broken smile crossing his face. "Yeah, here you are." When he finally sat beside me, the distance was small enough that I could feel the heat of his arm against mine. Neither of us spoke for a while. The record crackled faintly. Outside, the wind brushed against the balcony railing. "Sometimes I think we find the right people at the wrong time," he said. "And sometimes we find the wrong people who make us feel right." I didn't know if that was supposed to comfort me or warn me, but I understood it, deeply. His eyes met mine, steady and searching. There wasn't the teasing confidence from before, just quiet need. My chest tightened. I could feel everything we'd been holding back gathering in the silence between us. He reached up, fingers grazing my cheek in a gesture so gentle it startled me. "You're shaking," he said softly. "I don't know what this is," I whispered. "Then stop trying to name it." That was all it took. The moment unfolded without rush or pretense. 2 people tired of pretending they weren't drawn together. His hand found mine, trembling but sure, and when our foreheads met, it felt less like a collision and more like an exhale years in the making. The world narrowed to the rhythm of breath and heartbeat, to warmth and nearness and the kind of honesty that exists only in silence. When our lips finally touched, it wasn't desperate. It was hesitant, searching, like both of us were testing whether the other was real. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, as if we were learning to speak through contact alone. No hunger, no chaos, just gravity pulling 2 lonely bodies toward the same small center. For a fleeting second, I forgot the rest of the world. My job, my rules, my fears. All of it dissolved under the weight of his hand at the back of my neck, the steady thrum of life beneath his skin. When we pulled apart, the room felt changed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. I couldn't meet his eyes right away. Guilt and wonder warred inside me, both too strong to name. He brushed his thumb against my wrist. "You okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I shouldn't have come, but I think I needed to." He nodded, gaze heavy but kind. "Me too." We sat there for a long time afterward, not touching, just breathing the same air. The clock ticked faintly. Somewhere below us, the city moved on, oblivious. I thought about my uniform folded on the backseat of my car, the logo stitched over the heart, a reminder of rules, of responsibilities, of the version of me that didn't cross lines like this. But here, in this dim apartment, that version felt far away, like someone I used to know. "I've spent years being careful," he said after a while, "doing the right thing, saying the right things, and still, somehow, I ended up empty." He looked at me then, really looked. Tonight, I don't feel empty. The confession hit harder than any declaration of love could. I felt it ripple through me, unsettling everything I thought I understood about what this was. Doesn't that scare you? I asked. All the time, he said. But being numb scares me more. I didn't answer. I just stared at the faint pattern of light across the rug, the reflection of the city shimmering through the glass. My heart still raced, not from desire but from the realization that something inside me had shifted, something I couldn't undo. After a while, he stood and walked toward the balcony. The night wind moved through his hair as he looked out over the city. It's strange, he said quietly, how one person can walk into your life by accident and suddenly everything looks different. I joined him at the door. The skyline stretched endless and glowing, every light a story we'd never know. I could feel the warmth of him beside me, the closeness that now carried both comfort and danger. He turned his head slightly. Do you regret it? I hesitated. I don't know yet. He smiled faintly, eyes still on the horizon. Maybe that's good. Maybe it means it mattered. We stood like that for a long while, saying nothing, letting the city speak for us. The night air brushed against our skin, cool and electric. When I finally left, it wasn't with the rush of guilt I expected. It was something quieter, like leaving a place that still held part of you. I drove home in silence, headlights carving pale lines through the wet streets. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked older somehow, or maybe just more honest. Somewhere between red lights and empty intersections, I realized I was no longer sure what to call what had happened. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. There had been tenderness there and recognition. Two strangers meeting at the edge of loneliness. Maybe it wasn't just desire. Maybe it was something deeper. The following week slipped by like a dream that refused to end. I showed up for work on time, but my mind was never there. Orders blurred together. Addresses repeated like echoes. I catch myself driving past a turn, forgetting which pizza was in which box. Reggie noticed first. Man, you good? He asked one afternoon while stacking boxes. You've been walking around like you left your soul in someone's apartment. I laughed it off too quickly. Just tired. Sure, he said, smirking. Tired looks a lot like daydreaming lately. He wasn't wrong. Every quiet moment became a reel of memories. The way the man's hand trembled against mine, the hush after the kiss, the sentence that had stayed with me. Maybe it means it mattered. Each time I tried to push the thought away, it only came back louder. By Friday, I'd missed 2 delivery windows, misread one address, and had to apologize to a furious customer who insisted she ordered extra olives. My manager pulled me aside. Daniel, you've been reliable since day one, he said. Don't start slipping now. Whatever's going on, fix it. I nodded, muttering a promise I didn't mean. I knew exactly what was going on, and I had no idea how to fix it. That night, I drove aimlessly after my shift ended. I told myself I wouldn't go near his building, but somehow I ended up parked across the street from it anyway. Headlights off, rain streaking the windshield. I watched the tower's windows glow faintly, one by one, until only his floor remained lit. I didn't go in. I just sat there, long enough to see the light finally flick off. Only then did I drive home, the city a blur of wet reflections and unanswered questions. The next evening, he called. I didn't remember giving him my number, but he must have found it on one of the delivery receipts. His voice came through soft but strained. Can you come over? Just for a bit. Something in his tone, fragile, uneven, made it impossible to say no. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different. The lights were dimmed, the air heavy. He met me at the door looking pale, unsettled. What's wrong? I asked. He hesitated, then said quietly, My wife's here. I froze. Here? As in, right now? He nodded, glancing toward the living room. She came to pick up some things. I didn't expect it. Through the doorway, I could see the faint silhouette of a woman pacing slowly near the window. Her voice carried low but sharp, a tone that sounded exhausted more than angry. Does she know about us? I asked. He shook his head quickly. No. She thinks I've just been distracted, which isn't entirely a lie. The gravity of what I'd stepped into hit all at once. I started to back toward the door. I shouldn't be here. He caught my arm gently. Please, just stay out of sight until she leaves. My heart pounded. Against my better judgment, I followed him down the hallway to a study. Bookshelves, a desk, the smell of paper and cedar. He closed the door halfway, leaving a sliver of light and sound between us. From the living room came the murmur of conversation. His voice steady, hers brittle and worn. You don't even try anymore, she was saying. I used to know who you were. Now I don't recognize you. I'm trying, he said quietly. I just don't know what to do when trying doesn't change anything. There was a pause, a sigh. Then her voice again, softer now. You used to look at me like I was the only one in the room. When did that stop? I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat. Guilt bloomed heavy and suffocating. I didn't belong here. Not in their house, not in their story. He didn't answer her right away. When he did, his voice broke slightly. I don't know when. I wish I did. Footsteps crossed the hardwood. I heard her picking up a bag, the soft clink of keys. I'll send the papers next week, she said finally. It's easier that way. He murmured something I couldn't catch. Then the front door opened and closed. Silence fell. I stood there for several seconds, afraid to breathe. When he finally appeared in the doorway, he looked older, like the argument had carved lines into his face. She's gone, he said quietly. I should go too, I said. But he stepped closer, his hand brushing the doorframe. Wait. The air between us vibrated with everything that hadn't been said. He exhaled, shoulders heavy. I didn't plan for any of this. You know that, right? I know. I thought I'd stopped feeling things like this. I thought I'd learned how to live without wanting. His voice cracked, the vulnerability raw now. But then you showed up. You reminded me what it feels like to be wanted for who I am, not for what I provide or fix or promise. The confession landed like a blow and a bomb at once. I swallowed hard. That's not fair to either of us. Maybe not, he said, but it's true. He moved closer, enough that I could see the reflection of the hallway light in his eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone playing a game. They were tired, grateful, lost. I can't stop thinking about you, he said. Not even when I try. The words hung between us, trembling. Something inside me gave way. I felt it like a fault line shifting. A mixture of ache, fear, and a desperate tenderness I didn't want to name. You shouldn't say that, I whispered. Then tell me to stop. Couldn't. Instead, tears stung at the corners of my eyes, uninvited. It wasn't the confession that broke me. It was the quiet sincerity of it. The way it stripped away every pretense and left us standing in the truth we'd both been avoiding. I wish you hadn't found me that night, I said, because now I don't know how to forget you. He reached out, his thumb brushing a tear before it could fall. Maybe you don't need to forget. Maybe it's okay to remember the parts that made you feel alive. I let out a shaky breath. It feels wrong. It feels human, he replied. And that's the part I'd forgotten. For a moment I wanted to believe him, to accept that what we had wasn't a mistake but a kind of rescue, however messy. But the weight of reality pressed hard against that illusion. I was a delivery guy who stepped into someone else's unfinished story. He was a man trying to rebuild his life from the ruins of another. And yet, when he pulled me into a quiet, wordless embrace, I didn't resist. It wasn't passion this time. It was comfort, grief, recognition. Two people holding on to something that couldn't last, simply because it felt real in a world that so rarely did. We stood there until the silence became unbearable, until the air between us started to ache. When I finally stepped back, my chest felt hollow. I need time, I said. I'll wait, he answered. The promise sounded fragile, like it might break if we spoke it too loudly. As I left, I caught a glimpse of the living room. The place where she'd stood moments earlier. The place where his life had started unraveling long before I ever knocked on his door. By the time I reached my car, the sky had opened into rain again, cold and unrelenting. I sat behind the wheel, soaked and trembling, and let it all crash over me. The guilt, the longing, the strange peace of being seen. For the first time in weeks, I cried. Not out of regret, but because I finally understood what he meant when he said you reminded me what it feels like to be wanted. The feeling was terrifying and beautiful, and I knew, even through the confusion, that it wasn't finished yet. Winter gave way to spring before I saw him again. The city thawed slowly, shedding its layers of frost and silence, and life crept back into the streets one cautious bloom at a time. I had quit the pizza job by then, switched to a small delivery company that kept me mostly on the move. It was easier not to linger, easier not to be reminded of a door that had once opened into something I still didn't have words for. The last I'd heard, the divorce was final. I didn't ask how. I didn't reach out. We had promised each other time, and time, for all its cruelty, kept its promise. Months passed, each one sanding down the sharp edges of memory until only the warmth remained. The sound of his laugh, the smell of cedar, the way rain sounded against his balcony glass. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into a coffee shop near the park. I'd been there before. The barista knew my order. I was halfway through stirring sugar into my cup when a familiar voice, low, deliberate, said my name. Daniel. I turned, and there he was. Not in the same sweater I'd memorized, not framed by soft light or quiet temptation, but in a simple button-down, sleeves rolled, hair a little longer, face a little leaner. Time had worked on him, but not unkindly. I thought you'd moved away, I said. Almost did, he replied with a small smile. But I figured I owed myself one more season here before starting over. He gestured to the empty seat across from mine. I nodded. For a while, neither of us spoke. The clatter of cups and low hum of conversation filled the space that used to be silence between us. Finally, he broke it. You look different. Better or worse? Freer, he said, like someone who finally learned how to breathe. I laughed softly. That makes one of us. He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. I'm getting there. He told me he'd sold the apartment, the one that had been both sanctuary and prison, and moved into a smaller place near the waterfront. I needed walls that didn't remember everything, he said. Starting fresh isn't as glamorous as they make it sound, but it's honest. Honest, I repeated. That's new for both of us. He nodded. It had to be. The truth cost enough already. We talked for an hour about nothing, work, traffic, how the city still smelled like rain in early spring. And then, like conversation always does when it circles too long around the surface, it sank deeper. He leaned back, fingers wrapped loosely around his cup. You know, after everything, I kept thinking about that night. Not the one with the towel, he added, smiling faintly. But the last one, the night she came by. I was afraid that would be the last memory you had of me. It almost was, I admitted. For a long time I thought it should be. Why? Because it hurt less to pretend you were just a mistake than to admit you mattered. He looked down at his coffee, then back at me. You mattered to me too, more than I knew how to handle. The honesty in his voice loosened something in my chest I didn't realize I'd been holding. We didn't owe each other anything anymore, and maybe that was what made the words land cleanly this time. I was angry for a while, I said quietly. At you, at myself, at how easy it was to lose control of something I thought I understood. But now, I think I'm grateful. For what? For learning that desire isn't the same as love, and that love doesn't have to start perfectly to end honestly. He smiled, tired but real. Maybe that's all we ever were. Honest at the wrong time. Maybe, I said. Outside, sunlight filtered through the cafe window, warm and slow. It caught in the flecks of gray at his temples, in the steam rising from his cup. We had both changed, grown softer around the edges, less afraid of silence. The electricity that once lived between us had cooled into something steadier, like embers that still glowed when the wind touched them. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine in the smallest gesture. Not possession, not apology, just recognition. I'm sorry, he said, For the confusion, for the hurt. But I'm not sorry for meeting you. I shook my head. Don't be. I wouldn't trade it. Even the parts that hurt taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. And what's that? That sometimes the right connection happens inside the wrong story. He exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something he'd carried too long. I like that, he said. The wrong story. Feels accurate. We finished our coffee. When we stood to leave, he hesitated, then stepped closer and gave me a brief, quiet hug. No lingering, no hidden urgency. Just warmth, the kind that stays long after the contact ends. As we pulled apart, he said, maybe someday we'll stop calling it wrong. Maybe, I said and smiled. He left first, disappearing into the slow-moving crowd. I stayed behind, watching through the window as he crossed the street, the sunlight catching the edge of his sleeve. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Some stories don't end with goodbye. They just reach a point where silence says enough. I sat down again, letting the last of the coffee cool, and thought about how strange life can be. How one delivery, one late-night knock, could alter everything I thought I knew about love, guilt, and forgiveness. It had started with a towel and a lie, something that should have been forgettable, a passing encounter built on temptation. But what followed had rewritten me in quiet ways. It taught me that connection doesn't always arrive dressed as virtue, and that not every wrong beginning leads to regret. Sometimes it leads to understanding. When I finally stepped outside, the air smelled faintly of rain again, the same as the night we met. I turned toward the street, feeling the city breathe around me, vast and indifferent but somehow kinder than before. I wasn't his secret anymore, and he wasn't my mistake. What we were, whatever name it deserved, had existed honestly, if imperfectly. It had left its mark without burning everything down. As I walked away, I caught myself smiling, not from nostalgia or longing, but from a quiet sense of peace. It started with a towel and a lie, but what we built afterward was real. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.